I carried my family's responsibilities, but was cut out of the will. I was 24 years old when my name quietly became the solution to everyone else's problems. My name is Alina Carter, and this happened in a small rented house outside Columbus, Ohio, the kind of place where the walls are thin and bills pile up faster than hope. My father, Robert Carter, was 58 then, already sick enough to be unreliable, but not sick enough to stop making decisions that affected everyone else. The first bill I paid wasn't dramatic. It was a $642 hospital invoice from Mount Carmel East, folded once and left on the kitchen counter beside the coffee maker. My mother, Diane, didn't ask me to cover it. She just sighed and said, "I don't know what we're going to do," and my younger siblings, Mark and Lacey, suddenly found reasons to leave the room. I paid it that night. At the time, it felt responsible. I had just finished nursing school, landed a steady hospital job, and compared to everyone else, I was doing fine. My parents told me how proud they were, how lucky they were to have a daughter like me, and I believed that meant something. Dad had been recovering for years, first from a back injury, then heart issues, then complications that never fully went away. He used to be loud, decisive, the man of the house, but illness softened him in public and sharpened him in private. He hated needing help, and somehow that resentment always landed on me. The second bill was rent. The third was utilities. The fourth was groceries. By the time I was 26, I was covering nearly everything, mortgage payments included, because my parents said owning the house was important. Stability mattered, family roots mattered, and I mattered too, or at least that's what they said when they needed another transfer. Mark worked part-time and complained constantly about being stressed. Lacey was in college and couldn't be distracted by money, and I was told I was strong enough to handle it. I moved back in to help care for Dad, sleeping in my childhood bedroom while still paying for an apartment I rarely saw, because they said it made things easier if I stayed close. Easier for appointments, easier for emergencies, easier for everyone except me. In front of relatives and church friends, Dad praised me, talked about how lucky he was, how I never complained, how family stuck together. Behind closed doors, he criticized everything, said I tracked money too closely, said I made him feel small, said I acted like the house belonged to me just because I paid for it. My mother always smoothed things over, said he didn't mean it, said illness changed people, said I needed to be patient. So I was. I worked overtime at the hospital, missed holidays, canceled trips. My savings disappeared quietly, replaced by receipts and confirmations. Every time I hesitated, I was reminded of sacrifices, of how my parents raised me, of how family doesn't abandon family. Guilt wasn't shouted in our house, it was delivered calmly, like a reminder I should already understand. When Dad's condition worsened at 59, things escalated fast. Hospice consultations, legal paperwork, conversations whispered instead of spoken, and for the first time, inheritance was mentioned. Casually, jokingly, as if it didn't matter. My mother said none of it was important. My siblings laughed and said they'd fight over Dad's old truck. I didn't laugh, but I didn't speak either. I assumed the truth was obvious. I assumed that years of paying, caring, sacrificing meant something without needing to be said. I assumed wrong. Because one afternoon, while clearing the kitchen table, I saw a manila folder I wasn't meant to see, papers half pulled out, a name typed neatly under beneficiaries, and it wasn't mine. Not once. I stood there holding the folder, listening to my family talk in the next room like nothing had changed, realizing for the first time that while I thought I was holding this family together, they had already decided who mattered when everything was over. And the question that hit me then wasn't about money, it was this. If I was good enough to pay for everything while he was alive, why wasn't I good enough to be remembered when he was gone? By the time I turned 27, no one asked anymore. Money just disappeared from my account on schedule, like a subscription I never agreed to but couldn't cancel. Mortgage on the 1st, utilities on the 5th, groceries every week, prescriptions whenever Dad's condition shifted, and it always shifted at the worst possible time. What changed wasn't the bills, it was the attitude. Thank you turned into expectation. Appreciation turned into irritation whenever I asked questions. My mother started saying things like, "You know how things work." My father stopped acknowledging the transfers altogether, and my siblings began making plans that assumed I would cover whatever gap existed. Mark bought a new phone. Lacey planned a spring break trip. When I hesitated about covering a late mortgage payment, my father snapped, said if I was going to hold money over their heads, I shouldn't help at all. The words stunned me, because that was exactly what I was doing, helping, and somehow it was already being framed as control. I started keeping records quietly, every receipt, every transfer, every confirmation email. Not because I wanted anything back, but because something in me sensed I would need proof one day, even if I didn't yet know of what. That was when Karen Mitchell entered the picture. She was introduced as a family friend from church, early 60s, soft voice, always carrying baked goods. She started visiting Dad while I was at work, sitting with him, helping my mother, praising my dedication loudly, telling everyone how lucky my parents were to have me. I didn't distrust her at first. I was too tired to distrust anyone. But slowly, things shifted. Dad stopped calling me during the day. Appointments were rescheduled without my knowledge. Paperwork appeared already filled out. Karen always smiled and said she was just helping. My mother said it was nice to have support. My siblings loved her because she asked nothing of them. And I didn't realize until much later that what she was really doing was positioning herself between me and the family I was funding. The first time I noticed money missing, I blamed myself. The second time, I checked the account. The third time, I realized someone else had access. When I brought it up, my father accused me of being paranoid, said Karen would never take advantage, said she helped out of kindness, unlike me. The comparison landed like a slap, because kindness apparently didn't count if it came with sacrifice. That night, lying awake in my childhood bed, listening to the house hum with electricity I paid for, I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Doubt. Not about them, about how long I could survive this. By 28, I wasn't just tired, I was invisible. The house ran on routines I funded and no one acknowledged. My shifts at Grant Medical Centers stretched longer, 12 hours turning into 14, overtime becoming normal. And still, when I walked through the front door, no one asked how my day went. They asked if I'd picked up Dad's prescriptions. Karen was there more often now. She had a key. No one told me when that happened. I noticed it the night I came home early and found her in the kitchen, moving comfortably, reorganizing cabinets I paid to stock. She smiled like she belonged there, said Diane had given her a spare, said it was easier that way, and my mother nodded, like this had always been the plan. Dad trusted her. That much was obvious. He listened to her in a way he hadn't listened to me in years. She spoke softly, agreed quickly, framed suggestions as concern, not control. She told him he deserved peace, that stress wasn't good for his heart, that I worked too much and worried too much, that I needed rest, distance, space. Every word sounded reasonable until I realized the pattern. She was easing me out. Appointments happened without me. Financial discussions happened without me. Decisions were made before I even knew there was a decision to make. When I asked why I wasn't informed, my mother said Karen was helping coordinate things, said I had enough on my plate, said I should be grateful. My siblings echoed it, said I was overreacting, said I didn't need to be involved in everything, which would have been comforting if I wasn't paying for everything. The breaking point came with the paperwork. I found documents on the dining table one afternoon, power of attorney drafts, healthcare proxies, my name missing from all of them, Karen's typed neatly where mine used to be discussed. I knew because I had been part of those early conversations. I stood there reading, heart pounding, realizing this wasn't oversight, it was replacement. When I confronted my father, he looked away. He said Karen understood things better. He said I was too emotional. He said he didn't want money complicating family matters. I reminded him I was the money. That was when he snapped, accused me of acting entitled, said I kept score, said real help didn't come with expectations. Karen stood behind him, silent, supportive, the picture of selfless concern. And in that moment, I understood something devastating. She hadn't taken my place. They had given it to her. After that, the hostility sharpened. Karen was present for every conversation. My mother deferred to her. My siblings treated her like an authority, and I became a guest in the house I paid to maintain. When I stopped covering small expenses to test the reaction, things unraveled fast. Lights flickered, pantry emptied, tension exploded. Suddenly, I was irresponsible, selfish, abandoning them during a crisis. The narrative shifted overnight, my years of support rewritten as control, as manipulation, as something toxic they needed relief from. And then Dad collapsed. The ambulance came while Karen held his hand, and I stood in the doorway, useless, watching EMTs work around me like I wasn't family. At the hospital, Karen was taken aside, updated, consulted, while I waited, unacknowledged, realizing the worst betrayal wasn't coming, it had already happened. Because as I sat there staring at the floor, one thought repeated itself louder than the machines around us. If they had already replaced me while he was alive, what exactly did they plan to do once he was gone? Dad never recovered from that collapse. Robert Carter, 59, was rushed to Ohio Health Riverside Hospital. Karen arrived first, already in scrubs from her volunteer work, calm and reassuring to the nurses, while I, Alina, 28, tracked the ambulance, heart racing, realizing in the back of my mind that the house, the money, and my father's health had all been sliding out of my control for months. At the hospital, I stood outside the ICU waiting area, trying to speak to a nurse, being told I wasn't listed as a primary contact. My mother, Diane, nodded to Karen as if approval of my presence was a formality, not my right. Mark and Lacey arrived later, whispering, clutching phones, worried about insurance coverage, but mostly worried about the drama. And I realized this wasn't just about Dad anymore. This was about erasing me. For a week, I hovered in that hospital, paying for meals, parking, extra medications, coordinating nurses' shifts, while Karen handled meetings with doctors, whispered into Dad's ear, and somehow made it seem like she was the daughter who understood, the daughter who kept it together, while I, the one who had spent years funding everything, was politely told to wait, to step back, to let the professionals manage, each reminder of my absence hitting like a cold slap until the day Dad died. He passed quietly at dawn, his hand in Karen's, my mother sobbing in a chair behind her, my siblings scattered in corners, and I stood frozen at the door, realizing that in every sense I had been replaced before the final breath. The hospital staff murmured condolences, neighbors arrived later, everyone praising my dedication over the years, but only Karen was credited with the final decisions, the will reading, the estate distribution, and the control over what remained. 2 weeks later, the lawyer called, the reading scheduled at the local firm downtown Columbus. I walked in expecting formality, closure, perhaps reconciliation. Instead, I found my siblings smiling nervously, Karen perched in the chair closest to my father's personal documents, and the lawyer began reading. The house, the savings, the car, even Dad's personal belongings, everything except a few token items were left to Mark, Lacey, and Karen Mitchell, my name absent, not even in a line, not even a note. My stomach turned. My mother looked at me, teary, saying softly, "He thought you'd understand," as if understanding could replace decades of care, as if the years of paying bills, managing health crises, covering mistakes, sacrificing everything counted for nothing. My brother whispered, "You make good money anyway." My sister said, "He assumed you didn't need it," and Karen smiled politely, a little too satisfied, holding the legal folder, clearly proud of her position. My mind flashed back to every bill I paid, every sleepless night, every time I put myself last, and the realization hit harder than grief itself. I had funded my own erasure. I didn't cry at first. I didn't scream. I sat there quietly, letting the shock settle into the sharp, bitter truth. And that's when I understood the final piece of the betrayal. Karen hadn't just inserted herself into Dad's care. She had quietly manipulated every interaction, every perception, every conversation, making it seem as if my absence, my exhaustion, my dedication had been a burden instead of a gift. The family had fallen into her hands, willingly, happily, taking her side, painting me as entitled, overbearing, unnecessary, my contributions erased, while she became indispensable, and the people I had sacrificed for most of my adult life, the people who owed everything to me, had let it happen. I walked out of the lawyer's office without a word. I didn't pick up calls, I didn't answer texts, I didn't look back. That night, alone in my apartment, I went through every bank statement, every hospital invoice, every transfer, adding it up quietly, calculating what I had given, what they had taken, what they owed nothing for, and I realized something that no inheritance could ever give me. I was done. After the will reading, the house felt suffocating, not physically, but emotionally. Every corner of it whispered betrayal. Mark and Lacey avoided my gaze. Diane's eyes were always wet, but never with acknowledgement of what I had done, only guilt that I dared to feel. And Karen moved through the rooms like she owned them, smiling, polite, knowing exactly the position she had maneuvered herself into. For the first time in years, I understood clearly what I had been. A placeholder, a servant, a guarantor of their comfort, and now dispensable. I didn't respond to calls or texts, but the backlash arrived anyway. Diane showed up at my apartment the next day, keys in hand, saying she needed help with the utilities, the electric bill, just a little guidance, she said, voice trembling, pretending concern. But I recognized it as manipulation, the same old pattern, and I told her flatly I wouldn't help. I couldn't. She screamed, accused me of abandoning the family, said I was cruel, selfish, ungrateful, and when I stayed silent, she slammed the door behind her, leaving the faint scent of her perfume as a reminder that guilt alone wasn't enough to control me anymore. Mark called repeatedly, texts coming faster than I could read them, pleading, demanding, whining. "You have to fix this. Mom can't manage. The house is falling apart." Every message dripping with entitlement, every word an attempt to make me responsible for the chaos I didn't create. And I realized for the first time that the people I had sacrificed everything for weren't only ungrateful, they were actively trying to pull me back into the system that had drained me. Then Karen reached out. She sent a message through email, careful, polite, saying she never wanted to hurt me, that she just did what Dad needed, that she hoped we could remain friendly, that she hoped I understood her actions. And for the first time, I looked at her clearly, realizing she had been the orchestrator from the very beginning, that every slight, every misdirection, every family narrative that made me the villain had her fingerprints on it. I didn't respond. Instead, I went through the financials, meticulously, every transfer, every late payment I covered, every gap I filled that they never acknowledged, and I realized something critical. Karen had used me, my family had used me, and all of it had been done with precision, with patience, with the certainty that I would stay silent, that I would continue to sacrifice, that I would continue to forgive. That night, I made a decision. I called a lawyer, not to sue, not for revenge, but to protect myself, to formalize boundaries, to reclaim my life legally and permanently. And when my mother called screaming that I was destroying the family, I didn't answer. When Mark threatened legal action over the house, I forwarded everything to my lawyer, calmly, meticulously, knowing that nothing they said could erase years of evidence, that their threats were hollow, that they had already lost the leverage they thought they held. I blocked numbers, I changed my address, I stopped covering bills. I walked away from every responsibility that wasn't mine, finally allowing the chaos they created to exist without me as a buffer. The first few weeks were electric. Phone calls from relatives asking why I wasn't helping, neighbors wondering where I had gone, small community gossip about the Carter family falling apart, every snippet reinforcing what I already knew. Absence speaks louder than explanation. And then came the final twist. A family friend, the one Dad had confided in years ago, reached out quietly, saying she had proof that Karen manipulated documents, that she positioned herself as a beneficiary while quietly rewriting what Dad intended, that she misrepresented Dad's wishes to the family, and that if I had been present, if I had been acknowledged properly, everything I lost could have been mine. The irony was sharp. I had been right to distrust, right to step back, right to protect myself, yet the confirmation of the manipulation was almost cruel, a bitter reward of truth, showing that not only had I been erased, I had been erased for the gain of someone entirely unworthy. I looked at the documents, traced the transfers, compared them to hospital logs, to emails, to appointments I was excluded from, and the picture was indisputable. Karen had orchestrated everything, my family had allowed it, and I had been expendable all along. I closed the folder. I felt relief. I felt anger. I felt liberation, because I knew something they would never understand. You can erase a person's money, manipulate perception, rewrite history, and even block their presence, but you cannot erase their choice to walk away. And as I finally sat in my apartment, alone, breathing the quiet of my reclaimed life. Months passed. I didn't hear from my mother, Mark, or Lacey. Karen tried once, a polite email that ended up in the trash without reading it. The silence was absolute, and for the first time in years, I realized what freedom felt like. No guilt, no expectation, no invisible chains of obligation bragging me through someone else's mistakes. I moved again, farther from Columbus, somewhere my name meant nothing, my identity untangled from the family that had used me. I rented a small apartment, furnished it with my own money, ate meals I paid for without anyone else demanding contribution. I celebrated my birthday alone for the first time in years, and it felt like celebration, not endurance. Then came the practical consequences for them. Without me covering utilities and bills, the house went into foreclosure. Karen tried to manage finances, but she wasn't the one who had balanced months of chaos. Mark and Lacey fought constantly. Diane's health worsened under the stress, and neighbors whispered about how the once perfect Carter household was collapsing. Their entitlement couldn't survive absence. Their comfort relied entirely on my sacrifice. And when I saw photos online of the house, overgrown lawn, peeling paint, empty mailbox, I felt nothing. Not joy, not satisfaction, just closure. A few weeks later, I learned Karen had moved away quietly, leaving my siblings to deal with the fallout. No note, no apology, no acknowledgement of the years she had manipulated me. It was almost poetic, the architect of my erasure disappearing once the building collapsed, leaving the family to deal with the consequences of their choices. I thought about calling my mother once. Diane, who had once cried on my shoulder, begged for my help, framed my absence as cruelty, but I didn't, because some bridges, once burned, aren't meant to be crossed again. I spent evenings reviewing my own finances, slowly building stability, investing in myself, finally acknowledging the years I had erased from my own life to maintain theirs. And for the first time, I allowed myself to feel proud, not guilty, proud of setting boundaries, proud of walking away, proud that finally my care didn't come at the cost of my own existence. Then came the final confirmation, the one thought that had haunted me since discovering the will. A mutual friend of the family, someone who had been quietly observing from the sidelines, called me. She told me Robert, my father, had asked about me in his final days. Specifically, repeatedly, he had wanted me there. He had assumed I would come, that I would understand the urgency and the need to be present. She said he had left a letter for me, hidden, meant to be delivered after everything settled, a small acknowledgement of love, of gratitude, but it never reached me. It wasn't until months later that I found it tucked in an old drawer at the house, forgotten by everyone else. In it, he wrote, "Elena, you are my heart. You always understood even when no one else did. I am sorry they didn't see it. You have my love, always." I read it once, I read it twice, I let it sit on the counter, not as a consolation, but as confirmation that my love had been acknowledged in the only way that mattered, privately, sincerely, without expectation. And that's when I understood the final truth. I didn't owe anyone else anything. Not my siblings, not my mother, not Karen. I didn't owe explanations, apologies, or validation. I owed myself life, freedom, and recognition. I finally allowed myself to close the chapter completely, and as I stood in my new apartment, sunlight spilling through the window, I asked myself the question that would define everything I had endured, everything I had walked away from, everything I would never allow again. If the people you love only recognize your worth when it serves them and erase you when it doesn't, is staying behind ever truly love or just a trap?